Novel 4.2 To Serve with Love. Characters. Major characters: Ricky Braithwaite, the narrator; Gillian Blanchard, Mrs. Dale Evans; Denham, Pamela Dare, Mr. Florian. Minor characters: Bob Belmont, Jacqueline Blender, Kinty, Selma Drew, Hackman, Moira Joseph, Palmer, Euphema Phillips, Jan Purcell, Lawrence Seals, Jess Belmont, Buckley, Josie Daves, Patrick Foreman, Titch Jackson, Monica Page, Barbara Pegg, Potter, Sapiano, Theo Watson. Summary of the novel. To Serve with Love is a work of fiction based on the life of the author E.R. Braithwaite. The main character, E.R. Braithwaite, works as an engineer in an oil refinery. He served in the Royal British Air Force in the war. After the war, being a black person, he was unable to find employment. As a last resort, he applied in a school to become a teacher. Surprisingly, he is accepted at the Greenslade School in London's East End and is set to teach the senior classes of the school. While reading the novel, we have to understand that the time period in which the story takes place is very important. Braithwaite finds that even though he considers himself British and has served in the Royal Air Force (RAF), the English do not consider him to be one of them. This leads Braithwaite to feel bitter about the English and colonialism as well as about his white students. Braithwaite's teaching position starts out roughly and is embarrassed time and again. He considers his students disrespectful, ill-mannered and mischievous, while his students consider him to be an arrogant outsider, unfamiliar with the social environment in which they have grown up. The students harass him from day one, slamming their desks during his lecture, using foul language and bullying him to a great extent. Even the girl students do not spare a moment to harass Braithwaite. In a reaction to that, Braithwaite verbally scolds the girls for acting in an unladylike manner and being unruly in the class. When he understands that his outburst has not gained him any respect and cooperation from the students, he changes his teaching and handling tactics and he decides to interact with them as though they are adults and respectable persons. He requires every girl to be referred as Miss and that his students call him Sir at first. The students find this level of difference ridiculous and unnecessary. However, they come around after only a few weeks, completely changing both their hygiene and their attitudes towards one another. This marks the success of Braithwaite in handling the students in a very amicable way. To increase the class cultural exposure, he takes them on field trips and excursions to museums and theatres. To everyone's surprise, many of the students have never been. A white female teacher, Gillian Blanchard, accompanies the class on these excursions. This marks the beginning of a friendship between Blanchard and Braithwaite. Similarly, Braithwaite's relationship with his students is tested many a times. Although his students frequently disappoint and hurt him, he learns to forgive them. The students constantly surprise him with their maturity, empathy and knowledge. Another facet of the story which greatly affects its narrative lies in the heavy history of colonialism. Its dark consequences, mental and physical trauma that increases Braithwaite's hatred and wrath for British. He constantly feels the prejudicial effects of colonialism while living in England after World War II, and these negative experiences frequently shape his thoughts and actions. Braithwaite is surprised and shocked by the conditions in which these students live and also the physical trauma of the war that can be seen throughout his teaching environment. Theme of the novel. Student-teacher relationship, prejudice and racism are the major themes of the novel. E.R. Braithwaite gets a job of a teacher in a rather rough and notorious school. He finds that the students belong to a background that is not suitable for learning and their overall development and progress. He notices that the students are in no mood to change their attitude and behavior. Braithwaite, with his novel and creative ideas, innovative techniques and understanding the students' physiology, ultimately wins their hearts in no time. Though he was bullied, harassed, mentally and physically tortured many times, he didn't lose his patience and continued implementing his novel ideas and techniques that helped him to bring a significant change in his students' lives. The racism prevalent in Great Britain during the mid-1940s, the time period during which To Serve with Love takes place, is of primary significance in the novel. The narrator cites repeated incidents in which the in which the Britons, including encounters on the bus, at job interviews at Greenslade School, when searching for housing, at a restaurant with his girlfriend, and so on. At the outset, Braithwaite is struck by the unexpectedness of such prejudice. He was brought up in a British Guiana and he himself viewed as a British citizen, not as a black British citizen in a British colony. Then he served Great Britain in the Royal Air Force that gave him respect and esteem in the society. The day he left the job, he found himself to be an outsider. Braithwaite's extensive properties and education was of no use in job interviews, where he is informed that the job has already been filled or he is overqualified for it. This heightens Braithwaite's sense of betrayal for the British. Interestingly, he never lashes out physically and only rarely does he do so verbally. He exhibits the patient endurance at times, and at others he describes the way the rage inside him is transforming into hatred so strong that he desires to hurt those who treat him unfairly. As a result of such experiences, Braithwaite finds the students at the Greenslade School to be a bit notorious and high and rough in behavior, but with proper care and treatment, all the students would surely achieve success and goals in their life. Synopsis of the extract. In this extract, Braithwaite recounts the half-yearly report of the Students' Council, in which the students of the school report to the faculty and other students on what they have been studying thus far. Braithwaite's class representatives speak knowledgeably about their coursework and place a considerable amount of emphasis on how much they have learned about different people, cultures, customs, and the importance of international and interracial cooperation. Miss Joseph and Denham, both students of Braithwaite's class, preside over the meeting. At the outset, Mr. Florian, the headmaster, addresses the meeting with a lengthy but well-received presentation. One after another, each class gives a brief report of their progress through their chosen representatives on what they have been studying in each subject so far. A panel of teachers is chosen for each class to answer any questions regarding the report submitted by the class. The lowest class begins first, and it is obvious that as the students progress through the ranks, there is a marked development in their ability to express themselves. Mr. Braithwaite's class, being the oldest, was the last to present their report. Miss Joseph begins the highest classes proceeding by clarifying that the common theme underlying all their studies this term is the interdependency of mankind. Potter speaks in the field of math, focusing on how greater understanding in the world is fostered by the use of common weights and measures. Miss Pegg and Jackson speak on geography, and Miss Dare and Fernman discuss the subject of physiology, with Fernman stealing the show by exhibiting a model of a human skeleton and stressing the class conclusion that basically all people were the same. Miss Dodd reports on history and Miss Joseph on domestic science. Denham creates a stir by speaking on the required subject of PT and games, complaining that the class was ill-conceived and pointless. Mrs. Weston, Mrs. Dale Evans and Miss Phillips are chosen at random to answer the students' questions arising from the senior presentations. When Denham pursues his inquiry on the necessity of requiring all students to take PT, Mr. Weston responds quite ridiculously, trying to bluster his way out of the subject and offering no coherent argument. Unexpectedly, the quiet and hesitant Miss Phillips steps in and gives a sturdy defense of the practice. And Denham, knowing that he has been outwitted, has no choice but to respectfully cease his heated protest. Braithwaite is immensely satisfied with the progress of the students of his class. To Serve with Love, Chapter 17. The half-yearly report of the Students' Council was on November 15th and was one of the important days in the calendar of Greenslade School. I had heard quite a deal about these occasions and became as excited as the children as the day approached. It was entirely their day, arranged, presented and controlled by them. I observed the activities of my class as they prepared for it, noting with pride the business-like way in which tasks were allocated and fitted into a neat program. There were whispered conferences with members of other classes in the arrangement of it. On that day, there was no assembly. The children arrived smartly dressed and polished, and Miss Joseph and Denham, who seemed to be the important officials for the occasion, moved about among their colleagues, ensuring that each one was ready to play his or her part. A bell was rung at 10 a.m. and everyone trooped into the auditorium to sit together in classes. Miss Joseph and Denham, the two most senior students, sat on the stage, one on each side of Mr. Florian, who, as soon as everyone was seated in silence, stood and addressed the school. He spoke at length, reiterating the aims and policy of the school and of the important contribution each child could make to the furtherance of those aims. He gave praise wherever it was indicated, but insisted that there was yet a great deal to be done by themselves towards a general improvement in conduct, cleanliness, and the pursuit of knowledge. As I listened, I realized that this man was in no way remote from this school. His remarks all showed that he identified himself with it and everyone in it. He then wished them success with the council meeting and left the stage to tremendous applause. Things now moved quickly into gear. First, Miss Joseph stood up and gave a short explanation of the council's purpose and its activities. Each class would report through its representatives on the studies pursued during half year which began after Easter. A representative having been chosen for each subject, when all classes had completed their reports, a panel of teachers would be invited to occupy the stage and answer the questions from the body of the hall on matters arising out of the various reports. The selection of the panel, as with everything else, was entirely at the discretion of the children, and no members of the staff knew either how many or which teachers would be invited to sit. The reports began with the lowest or youngest classes first. These were mainly 12-year-olds who had joined the school the previous summer. Most of them were shy and rather frightened at standing up before the entire school, but nevertheless they managed it creditably. They had been newly introduced to the difficulties of seeking information for themselves, so the report was understandably rather short. Class after class was represented, and it was obvious that with each succeeding term there was a marked development in their ability to express themselves. Much of their work was rather elementary, but to them it loomed large because they understood it and something of its relationship to themselves. Throughout all the reports, the emphasis was on that they understood rather than on what they were expected to learn. When the turn of my class came, I sat up anxiously. From the list he held in his hand, Denham called out the names of the representatives together with the subjects on which they would report. Potter, arithmetic; Sapiano, nature study; Miss Pagan Jackson, geography; Miss Darren Fernman, physiology; Miss Dodd, history; Denham, PT and games; and Miss Joseph, domestic science. I felt terribly pleased and proud to see the confident courtesy with which Denham used the term Miss in addressing each of the senior girls. I felt sure that this would itself be something for the younger ones to aim at, a sort of badge of young adulthood. As their names were called, they walked up to the stage and took their seats with commendable gravity. Miss Joseph then gave a short address. She said that their lessons had a particular bias towards the brotherhood of mankind, and that they had been learning through each subject how all mankind was interdependent in spite of geographical location and differences in color, races, and creeds. Then she called on Potter. Potter went on to speak of the work they had done on weights on measures of the relationship between the kilogram and the pound, the meter and the foot. He said that throughout the world, one or the other of these two methods was either in use or understood, and that it was a symbol of the greater understanding which was being accomplished between peoples. Sapiano spoke on the study the class had made of pests, especially black rot on wheat, ball weevil on cotton, and Colorado beetle on potatoes. He showed how many countries had pooled their knowledge and results of research on the behavior, breeding habits, and migration of these pests, and were gradually reducing the threat they represented to these important products. Miss Pagan Jackson divided the report on geography between them. Jackson spoke first on the distribution of mineral deposits and vegetable produce over the earth's surface, how a country rich in one was once deficient in the other, and of the interchange and interdependence which inevitably followed. Miss Pegg dealt with human relationships, stressing the problems facing the post-war world for feeding, clothing, and housing its populations. She also made a reference to the thousands of refugees stateless and unwanted, and to the efforts and programs of UNICEF. Fallman, as usual, had a trump card up his sleeve. When called, he made a signal to someone off stage, and Welsh and Allison appeared bearing a skeleton between them, together with a sort of gallows. When this arrangement had been set up, there was a skeleton hanging from the hook screwed into the top of its skull, gently revolving at the end of a cord. This was somewhat in the nature of comic relief, and the school showed its approval by laughing unapprehensibly. But levity soon evaporated when Fernman began to speak. His voice was clear and precise, and he had a strong sense of the dramatic. Calmly, he told them that it was a female skeleton, but that was a fact and could easily be proved. But he could not say with any assurance whether she had been Chinese or French or German or Greek, nor could he say if she had been brown or white or a mixture of both. And from that, he said the class had concluded that basically all people were the same. The trimmings between them might be different, but the foundations were all laid out according to the same blueprint. Fernman was wonderful. He had them eating out of his hand. Miss Dare's contribution was something of an anticlimax after Fernman's performance, and she seemed to realize it. She spoke about the problems which all humanity has to face in the terms of sickness and disease, and of the advantages gained by interchange of knowledge, advice, and assistance. Miss Dodd reported on the period of history the class had studied, the Reformation in England. She told of the struggles of men of independent spirit against clerical domination and of their efforts to break from established religious traditions. From those early beginnings, gradually grew the idea of tolerance for the beliefs and cultures of others, and now common interest in trying to study and understand those cultures. Denham's report was a bit of a shock. He severely criticized the general pattern of PT and games, emphasizing the serious limitations of space obtaining and the effect of that limitation on their games activities. He complained that the PT was ill-conceived and pointless and the routine monotonous. He could see no advantage in doing it. A jolly good game was far better. Apparently, he was voicing the opinions of all the boys, for they cheered him loudly. When the reports were over, Denham called two children at random from the audience and asked them to write the name of each teacher, including the head, on a slip of paper. These slips were folded and placed in a hat, jugged vigorously, and then withdrawn one by one. The names were called Mr. Weston, Mrs. Dale Evans, Miss Phillips. Denham and Miss Joseph led the others off the stage, and the teachers took their seats. Weston, big and bushily untidy between the two women. Then the questioning began. I believe I would have gone a long way to see what followed. It was an experience which I shall not easily forget. The questions were mostly from the top two classes, probably because the young children were either too timid or too uninformed to formulate their questions. The teachers had no briefing and were often caught out stammering in their indecision. But here again, I received a big surprise. The frilly, seemingly brainless Miss Euphemia Phillips proved to be the coolest and best informed of the three. She dealt with questions put to her with candor and authority, and would often intervene skillfully to assist one of the others without causing embarrassment. Weston cut a very ridiculous figure in the face of a Denham's blunt criticisms and Fernman's adroit questioning. He found himself completely nonplussed and tried to bluster his way out with a show of offended dignity. He could not effectively support the PT exercises for which he was partly responsible as having any definite physical advantage. Denham was a trained boxer and insisted that such exercises were only advantageous if practiced daily and for more sustained periods. PT twice weekly for 20 minutes was a waste of time, he asserted. Once again, Miss Phillips took the reins and her stock promptly shot up 100-fold. She reminded the school that every subject, including PT and games, had been carefully considered and fitted into the teaching timetable so that each student received maximum benefit from it. The school, with its limited facilities, must be considered in terms of the greatest good for the greatest number, and it would be beyond anyone's power to please everybody. Some of you, she concluded, fixing Denham with innocent eyes, are fortunate in your own fine physical development and do not really need the few meager helps of PT and games which this school can offer. Try to remember that there are others of whom our program is ideally suited. It may that some of you older boys might be able to help in that respect. Denham was not to be put off by these sugary remarks and those in reply. Then why do you have to do PT? Why don't you pick only those kids who need it? The rest of us can have a game of football or something instead of doing a lot of daft things that are not good to us. This was a poser, but she came right back at him, her blue eyes twinkling in her delight at this crossing of stakes. Let's say it is as much as an exercise of the mind as it is of the body, Denham. The whole timetable in the school is meant to help you in the world after you leave here, and doing what you are told in spite of not liking it is a part of the training. I feel sure that you will see the point in that. That stopped him. Poor Denham knew that he would have been outwitted, but he could do nothing about it, and sat looking rather rueful while Miss Phillips' smile broadened. This frilly, innocent-looking puss had gobbled her canary without leaving the tiniest feather. I began to understand how it was that so slight a creature could cope so effectively with her class. Soon after this, as the morning ended, the head went on to the stage and closed the proceedings, expressing his pride in all the children and his deep appreciation of their efforts. E.R. Braithwaite trooped, moved together in large numbers, furtherance, the advancement of a scheme or interest, discretion, the freedom to decide what should be done in a particular situation, commendable, deserving praise, gravity, here extreme importance, seriousness, address, a formal speech, peoples, the members of different nations, communities or ethnic group, levity, the treatment of a serious matter with humor, candor, quality of being open and honest, adroit, clever or skillful, nonplussed, serious, surprised or confused, poser, a problem or question that is difficult to solve or answer. Thank you.